Hello everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop, where I'm going to be talking about a TV show that Indiana Jones himself will probably not want to watch. Get it? Because, well, an adder, which is in the title Blackadder, is a type of snake, and Indiana Jones doesn't like snakes. Anyways, so, as you guys saw in the last episode, I talked about the first season of Blackadder, simply titled The Blackadder. Now, I'm going to be talking about the second season, which, simply enough, is titled Blackadder II. So before I start talking about the episodes from this season, I'm going to talk about some of the changes that were made to the show, with this season. Now, as I mentioned in the last episode, every season of Blackadder takes place at a different time period. And this season takes place during the, reign of Queen Elizabeth I, which was between 1558 to 1603. And in terms of characters, the three main characters that we had from the last season, Blackadder, Baldric, and Percy, are all pretty much the same. However, these are like the great-grandsons of the ones from the first season. And in terms of personalities, Blackadder and Baldric had a 180 when it comes to their personalities. In the first season, Blackadder was sort of more, less intelligent, but was still very scheming when it comes to his plans. However, in Season 2, they decided to make him slightly more intelligent and dashing, which is what all the other Blackadders afterwards would also be. And then Baldric, who was originally the most intelligent of the three main characters from the first season, got his IQ flipped around, and now, starting in Season 2, he's the idiot of the group, and every version of Baldric afterwards is like that as well. And as for Lord Percy, he's pretty much still the foolish sidekick that he was in the first season. But without further ado, now that I've gotten, the basics of the show out of the way, let's start talking about the episodes. So the first episode of Blackadder II, which is simply titled Bells, starts off with a woman by the name of Kate, who is in a financial situation with her and her father. So she decides to go to London to try and seek her fortune, and disguised as a male while she was there under the name Bob. Meanwhile, the main characters, Blackadder, Baldric, and Percy, are at home with Blackadder target practicing, with Baldric holding the targets, and later on, Kate, now being disguised as Bob, enters and wants a job. Blackadder then immediately hires her and fires Baldric in the process. However, Baldric was able to convince him to, stay, and then Blackadder was like, okay, you can stay, but you gotta work harder and you gotta sleep in the gutter. So as time went on, Blackadder started to get a strange attraction towards Bob, who, at the time, he still thinks is a guy. And in order to, figure out what he needs to do, he goes to a doctor who then prescribes leeches for him to use to try and dissolve in his mouth. However, Baldric later suggests to Blackadder to get advice from the wise old woman, who gave him some three not very helpful advice. 1, to kill Bob, or 2, to kill yourself, and 3, to go ahead and sleep with Bob, which then Blackadder was like, oh, well, that'll be easy, nobody will find out. And then she's like, but you also gotta kill everybody in the world, so they'll never find out. So then Blackadder obviously decides not to go with her plans. So Blackadder decides to fire Bob out of his service, but then Bob later reveals his breasts, revealing, of course, that they were a woman the whole time, which, in case you haven't been watching up until this point, it's, I already mentioned earlier, it's Kate. So, as soon as Blackadder found out, he decided to marry Kate. So, for the wedding, Blackadder decided to have a guy by the name of Lord Flashheart be his best man for the wedding. And he eventually shows up and started chatting up with every woman in the room, including the nurse of Queen Elizabeth I, who's like a recurring character on the show, pretty much supplying comic relief. And then Baldric, who is dressed up like the bridesmaid, since for the wedding he was the bridesmaid, so Yeah, I guess Flashheart mistook Baldric as a woman. He then decides to steal Kate away from Blackadder, and then Kate then reveals that to Flashheart that she prefers wearing boys' clothes, and then Flashheart was like, oh, well, that's funny, because I prefer wearing dresses. And then they start to run away together, and yeah, I guess it's safe to assume that they got married instead of Blackadder and Kate. Afterwards, Lord Melchett, who is another recurring character on the show, who works alongside Queen Elizabeth I, he says to Blackadder that in such circumstances, it is customary for the groom to marry the bridesmaid, which the bridesmaid was Baldric, and at the very end, like, Baldric, like, happily says, I do. And then we get to the next episode, simply titled Head, where Blackadder becomes the new Lord High Executioner and Minister of Religious Genocide. And to give him, like, the middle of the week off, he decided to make some changes by having the execution of Lord Pharaoh be changed from Wednesday to Monday. However, things don't go well as Queen Pharaoh wants to see her husband one last time before he, of course, gets executed, and she wanted to visit him on Monday. However, unfortunately, it was too late, as Blackadder now scheduled Lord Pharaoh's execution to be that day. So, in order to make up for it, Blackadder himself decided to pretend to be Pharaoh with a bag over his head to make sure, you know, Queen Pharaoh doesn't know who he is. So throughout the rest of the episode, Blackadder was worried about, you know, people eventually finding out that he killed Lord Pharaoh before they thought he was going to. And he and Percy happened to have the head of Lord Pharaoh, and they were going to try and, you know, disguise it, make it feel like he's alive. However, Lord Percy then notices that the head that Blackadder has is not Lord Pharaoh. However, it's another lord that actually got killed on Monday instead, by the name of Lord Ponsonby, who was supposed to be scheduled for execution on Friday, but they got executed on Monday instead, meaning that Baldric killed the wrong man. At first, Blackadder was relieved until he finds out that Queen Elizabeth is planning on visiting Lord Ponsonby. So, just like what he did with Lord Pharaoh, he decided to disguise himself as Lord Ponsonby, even though he later found out that Ponsonby actually only has one leg and has a speech impediment. So, in the third episode, Potato, Sir Walter comes to the kingdom after returning from a recent discovery that he had, and he told tales about it to the queen, and she was highly impressed. However, Blackadder attempts to upstage him by declaring his intentions to go to the Cape of Good Hope, a journey that Walter himself says is pretty much impossible. So, in order to take part on this journey to the Cape of Good Hope, basically what Walter said was the one part of the seven seas that, like, no sailors would want to go to because of how treacherous it is. Blackadder decides to hire a captain by the name of Captain Redbeard Rum, played by Tom Baker. That's right, you heard it here. Tom Baker, the fourth Doctor from Doctor Who, makes a guest appearance in this episode playing as Captain Rum. However, Captain Rum is a pretty insane captain, and this also doesn't have any legs and has no navigation skills whatsoever. As soon as Blackadder, Baldric, Percy, and Captain Rum start sailing, Rum then reveals that he has no idea how to get to the Cape of Good Hope, and his plan was to, you know, actually go to the Isle of Wight and just circle around it until everybody gets dizzy. And then Blackadder had another plan about, like, going to France for a few months and then come back home to claim that they've gone to the Cape of Good Hope. However, they soon find out that Rum does not know how to get to France either, and also doesn't know how to navigate a boat at all. Makes me really question how he's a captain. So, after 2 years of, you know, trying to get back to Britain, eventually, you know, their food and water ran out, so they had to drink their own urine, and they encountered a tropical island that had cannibal natives. They eventually got their way back to England, and the Queen greeted them and said she was fed up with explorers, and then Blackadder had to break the news to Queen Elizabeth's nurse, who had a crush on Captain Rum, saying that the natives ate him, and she was upset by this. However, they gave her his beard as a memento. So then the Queen demands to get presents that they got from their adventure. Blackadder then gave her a stick that you throw and it comes back to you, which is essentially a boomerang. And then she requests Blackadder to give Melchett and Walter gifts as well. Blackadder decides to give them a bottle of fine wine, which is actually Baldric's urine. And Blackadder then says that the fine wine is of inexhaustible supply. Then we get to episode 4, Money, where Blackadder gets visited by the Bishop of Bath and Wales, where he still owes the bishop £1,000 and threatens to shove a hot poker up his butt if he doesn't pay. So Blackadder tries unsuccessfully to blackmail the bishop, which Blackadder unfortunately only has £85. And he loses it to the Queen, who had a bet about him with Lord Melchett. So throughout the episode, the 3 main characters try their best to earn enough money. First, Blackadder and Baldric decide to be prostitutes, and that got them, only 6 pence. And once again, the Queen tricked Blackadder with bets, and he had to give the money to her. And then Percy decides to try and make money by doing alchemy, trying to make gold. However, it turned out to be green, and but Percy thinks it's valuable, while Blackadder doesn't think so. Blackadder then tries to get a couple to buy his house, and they did for £1,100. However, gets tricked once again by the Queen to give them money thanks to another bet. And the funny part about that is, this version of Blackadder is supposed to be, more intelligent than the other version, but, man, he is quite a fool when it comes to, the Queen. And then by the end, the bishop then comes to Blackadder, since Blackadder still wasn't able to repay his debt, and just when he was about to, do his thing to Blackadder, he was then, knocked out and drugged by Blackadder. And then Baldric then made a painting of the bishop in a very highly compromising position, which Blackadder then used to successfully blackmail the bishop this time into writing off his debt and giving him enough money to buy back his house. The bishop is then impressed by Blackadder's treachery, but wonders who the other figure in the painting is, and Blackadder then reveals the other figure to be Percy. So then we get to episode 5, simply titled Beer, where Blackadder finds out from a letter that his Puritan, wealthy aunt and uncle, Lord and Lady Whiteadder, are going to be visiting him to discuss his inheritance. And at the same time, though, Blackadder then makes a bet to Lord Melchett that Melchett will probably, be more drunk than Blackadder. Realizing that Blackadder has 2 different parties to try and handle, he decides to have them try and be simultaneously hosted in the same house. He has his and Melchett's party in Baldric's bedroom, while he decided to have his aunt and uncle be in a different room with Lord Percy. And Blackadder tries to go back and forth to try and attend both events at the same time. In order to make sure that Blackadder doesn't lose the bets, he decides to have a plan where he will say the words "very strong ale," and instead of the very strong ale, Baldric will give him water to make sure he doesn't, be flat out drunk that night. However, near the very end, where Melchett calls for Blackadder to take part in the drinking game, Blackadder then calls for it, but Baldric accidentally exposes the ale to be water, and then Melchett was like, here, actually drink it, and then Blackadder was then forced to actually drink the very strong ale. Afterwards, Blackadder then goes back to the his aunt and uncle's dinner all drunk and wearing an ostrich feather on his Cardinals hat. His aunt then realizes that he's been drinking and gambling, and unfortunately that means Blackadder won't be able to, inherit what his aunt and uncle were pretty much doing. And of course he ended up losing the bet to Melchett. However, as soon as the White Adders left the dinner, they accidentally encounter Melchett and some of the other people that Blackadder invited to the drinking party, and they all thought that the aunt and the uncle were strippers, and also thought the queen was a stripper as well. However, it was revealed that she was trying to, sneak into the party, mostly for the bets that Blackadder and Melchett had. And she was planning on executing everyone in the party. However, she decides to have a drink them herself, and everybody at the place then started getting drunk and was singing Blackadder's, little goblin song. Everybody at the party also forgot what happened. Melchett forgot about the bets. The queen forgot about her threats of execution, and Lord Whiteadder then decides to, discuss the inheritance. And then, Lady Whiteadder then emerges from the queen's frock, and hearing Blackadder mention the word luck, she then says, "Oh, that sounds rude, because it sounds like fuck," and then the credits then start rolling. So then we get to the final episode of Blackadder II, which is titled Chains, where Blackadder and Melchett get kidnapped by, Baldric's, archenemy, Prince Ludwig the Indestructible. However, Ludwig sent a letter to the Queen saying that he held Blackadder and Melchett for ransom, and instead of giving Ludwig the money, she decided to have a big party. So instead, Ludwig decided to instead of murdering them, he decided to have Blackadder and Melchett imprisoned for life, as long as they can, tell him how to get into the palace during the Queen's costume party. After Ludwig leaves, Blackadder and Melchett then make their escape back to England just in time for the party. And the Queen was dressed up like her father, King Henry VIII. Baldric was a pencil case. And Edmund arrives there, and at first you think the nurse character is dressed up like a cow, and then Blackadder then stabs the person in the cow outfit who everybody thought was the nurse, but it was actually revealed to be Prince Ludwig, who was pretending to be the cow. However, it wasn't actually Ludwig, as he was revealed to be alive and claims that he will get his revenge, but Blackadder then throws a dagger at him, saying, "You will die and be buried." Afterwards, everybody asks Blackadder how he knows that the person in the cow outfit wasn't Nursey, and Blackadder reveals, this is the point in the episode where he reveals that Ludwig was a master of disguise, and yeah, was able to make a costume that looked like a highly impressive cow costume, while he claimed that Nursey was just a sad, insane old woman with an udder fixation, as her cow outfit had a lot of udders on it. And then everyone asks Blackadder if they missed them. He tells Percy that he wishes that he was the one being tortured instead. He then says to Baldric that he was not missed at all. And then as for the Queen, he states that his life without her is a broken pencil, and she said, "What do you mean by that?" And then he says, "Pointless." And then the credits roll around, and when I was watching this, I'm like, oh, well, that's a much better ending than we had in the Season 1 finale. However, my joys were soon all the way down to that point when, after the credits, you do see Blackadder and all the other main characters lying on the floor dead. And then you see the camera pans over to what looks like to be the Queen Elizabeth I. However, it's actually Ludwig in disguise who says, "No, this is a disguise I can get really used to. However, I'm gonna need to change the voice for it." So, what do I think about Blackadder II? Honestly, I think it's quite a huge improvement compared to the Blackadder. There were definitely a lot more funnier moments, more interesting stories, the characters are great, the performances are phenomenal, and yeah, overall it's quite a better season of the show than the first. Definitely will recommend it to anybody who's a fan of British comedies, or if you haven't seen any British comedies before for some reason, then definitely give it a watch. But with that being said, that is about it for this episode of It Came From England. Now, in terms of the other seasons of Blackadder, Blackadder III and Blackadder Goes Forth, I will talk about them at some point on the show. Probably not this season. I'll probably have to save those for next season. But, yeah. I will talk about them in a later time. But, with that being said, if you guys enjoyed this episode, feel free to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more episodes of It Came From England and just mediocre plush content in general. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. That is about it. This is Tyler from the Character Workshop, signing out. Next time, I am going to talk about what I would arguably consider to be one of the biggest pioneers for internet animation on, like, YouTube and Newgrounds.